may be an iterative year for the Samsung phones, but there's actually quite a bit that changed with the S23. So let's talk about this guy and see if there's enough in it for you to change after I've used it for about 30 days to see if you think you should upgrade or if the S22 is still a good phone. So of course the S23 Ultra line is essentially your Note line now. So, you know, a couple years ago Samsung migrated or converged these product lines into one, and just the Samsung Note line became the Ultra line. And that is most apparent by this guy, the S Pen. That is your big #1 feature of a S23 Ultra, in my opinion, compared to the other Samsung product line. So what has changed this year? There's actually a couple things that have changed. One major change globally that makes a big difference for a lot of people, but that isn't just specific to the S23 Ultra. It's across the board. So first, let's talk about that global change. And it is all Samsung phones are now using a Snapdragon processor. This just is great for anyone that's in global or international territories. We all get the same performance. Some years Exynos was better, some years most years the Qualcomm was better. So now everyone gets the same processor. It's actually a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 by Samsung. What that essentially means is it's an overclocked version of the 8 Gen 2 that Qualcomm's released. So Samsung's just eking a little bit more performance than you might see in other flagship phones this year. Honestly, you probably won't notice a lot if you had two Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 phones by each other, one Samsung and say one from OnePlus. You probably wouldn't notice much of a performance difference, but it's there. Samsung took full initiative of the 8 Gen 2 processor to bump it up to its full maximum capabilities. One of the major changes that I feel is great compared to the previous S20 Ultra line is the screen itself. Now, the screen itself hasn't changed much over S22, for the exception of reducing the curve on the edge of the screen even more. I feel like this has always been a hindrance. It looks beautiful, it looks nice with the edge falling off, but to have a phone that is being focused on as a feature of the S Pen, getting close to those corners is personally quite frustrating in my opinion when you're trying to write or capture something and it doesn't pick up the correct input when you're on those corners. So now the screen has been reduced on the curvature somewhat. So you should notice a difference in this in writing. Personally, that has been one of my favorite features in testing this device, is I feel more comfortable in getting closer to the edges when I'm using like a Notes app. Now, as far as the rest of the screen, it's still Quad HD+, so you're still getting that maximum 1440p resolution, that full-scale variable refresh rate from 0 all the way up to 120 Hertz. The screen size is, of course, 6.8, which is the largest of the three. A 6.1 inch, that is the S23 that I did a review on. If you're curious about that phone, check out the card or the button at the end of the video to get a review on that if you're trying to compare which one you should go with. After using both of these for 30 days and switching between the two, it really comes down to preference. And that is very much so this year because of the internals being so close to the same in these products now that you're really not noticing much of a difference. Even the RAM, depending on the model you get of the S23 Ultra, it may be the same amount of RAM at 8 gig as the S23. If you go full spec at the top two tiers of space, at the 512 or 1 terabyte, you will get the 12 gig of RAM. So of course the difference with the RAM there is you'll be able to have more apps saved into the RAM so that you can utilize more apps in memory without them refreshing when you open them. And don't forget, in a tips video I did on these phones, there is such a thing called RAM Plus. That may be sufficient enough with you on an S23 to get what you're hoping for the amount of apps to be running in the background. Honestly, for the most part, you'll run out of apps you're interested in either 8 gig or 12 gig of running in the background. So beyond storage being larger in this phone, besides the screen being larger, besides the S Pen features, some of the other things that you'll get out of this is focused around the cameras. That is the big thing, the big differentiating factor is the cameras. Now, of course, the battery is way bigger. It's a 5,000 milliamp compared to a 3,800 on the S23, or a bump on that on the S23 Plus. Side note, really, if you're trying to decide between these three, it should only be two options to decide between, and that's the S23 or the S23 Ultra. If you're looking at the Plus, you might as well go up to this guy so you get everything. The marginal jump in price, to me, isn't worth it. You should just go up to the S23 instead of paying the S23 Plus price. The cameras are the other big thing, and really the main sensor is the big thing. This sensor comes in a whopping 200 megapixel camera sensor. What would you do with that on a smartphone at 200 megapixels? Well, really, the only thing you would probably do with this is take high quality photos that you would print. Because on this size screen, even this size screen, it's hard to tell honestly the difference between pictures I took on the S23 and the S23 Ultra. Now, if you zoom in, that's where you'll notice a big difference as well, because with that resolution count, you'll be able to keep more detail as you zoom in the pictures, unlike on the standard S23, which maxes at a 50 megapixel. And remember, that is all based on you going into the settings and forcing those higher resolution counts. By default, it's all going to default to a 12 megapixel, even on the Ultra, which if you don't go into settings and change, your pictures are going to almost look exactly the same on either the Ultra or the S23. So make sure if you're getting this phone and it's primarily for the pictures, you make sure in certain situations you bump up that image count. Now, be aware when you bump up those image counts to higher resolution than the standard default, you start to lose customization options on those lenses. And it will be a longer shutter speed time to actually take the picture, because it's trying to process all that data to get that higher resolution in there. Also, one of the reasons I didn't really mention the front-facing camera on my S23 review is because they're exactly the same camera on the front. They're a 12 megapixel camera. I believe last model's generation was a 10 megapixel, so they've jumped that up a little bit. Your primary focus, of course, is on your back cameras, and if you're interested in utilizing this phone for taking videos, then you should really look into utilizing a NICE rig. Essentially, that allows you to set up a monitor type solution so you can see how you're recording yourself and making sure that you are in frame to a camera. If you're interested in that, there's a card that should just be popping up here that you can go and check out that video. Might be a good way to figure out how to fully leverage this phone. And by the way, several of the other videos I've done on the S23 product line, I've done in 8K or even recording all of the video with the S23. And that's really the strength to this phone, is the powerhouse capabilities it is. If you want the utmost capable phone, you want the highest RAM, you want the highest availability of storage space, the best cameras, the biggest screen, the most fully featured phone with S Pen features and writing, there's nothing else out here as fully beefed out, spec'd as a Samsung S23 Ultra. There's no other company that just throws as much at one product or one phone that has as much capability as you can offer in a phone. So if you're looking for that phone that offers as much features as possible, then you can't go wrong with the S23. And this is really where the two differ, is really deciding for your use what you're looking for. If you're not using the S Pen and you don't really care about the 10x zoom, you might be considering to look at the S23 instead. You'll save a lot of money. A lot of carriers even have basically give the S23s away, especially if you have anything to trade in, where you're probably still paying for money on the S23 Ultra. Personally, myself, I would go with the S23 Ultra because I'm a big S Pen fan, but I will say this issue of being able to barely reach the other side or other edge of the screen, I don't like. That's a big trade-off with big phones. You gain a lot of things, you lose some with big phones. If you're in another region that's been on an Exynos processor as well, I think this would be a fantastic upgrade for you as well because you're getting that Snapdragon processor. And you probably will notice quite a bit of difference in performance over that Exynos processor you had before. So, if you got any questions, leave them in the comments below. Anything that you want me to cover about the S23 product line or any other questions, leave a comment and I'll see you in the next video.